The ICG is a community of independent market researchers who collaborate, share knowledge and experience to deliver value to fellow members and to clients. If you're an independent researcher and want to connect with over 400 like-minded people, gain access to our knowledge base, get inspiration, support and advice from other members, then why don't you join us? Either visit our website, theicg.co.uk/join, or email us at membership@theicg.co.uk. If you're a client company and want to connect with the largest resource of expert independent researchers in the world, with proven expertise across all markets, categories and techniques, then why don't you contact us? Either visit our website, theicg.co.uk/connect, or email us, connect@theicg.co.uk. If you're a supplier and want to promote yourself to over 400 buyers of research services, then why don't you contact us? Either visit our website, theicg.co.uk/advertise, or email us at admin@theicg.co.uk. The ICG, Expert Independent Researchers. This webinar is kindly sponsored by Holborn Focus, a high-quality viewing facility in the heart of central London. Our facility boasts 3 flexible studios offering natural daylight and clear sight lines. This relaxed and comfortable environment makes us the perfect location for depth interviews, focus groups, user testing, and medical and pharmaceutical device testing. Our central London location, right next to Holborn Tube Station, offers easy access across London and from national rail services. We are keen supporters of the ICG, and we have a special offer of complimentary sandwiches for the first group of participants you book. If you need a venue that's competitively priced and offers excellent service, please contact the Holborn Focus team.
Hello everyone, I'm really excited to be here with you today for this webinar, Finding Insight in the Noise, How to Approach Social Media Intelligence. Thanks very much for signing up. We're going to have some fun today, look at some tools, different approaches, and giving you hints and tips for analysing social media data. A lot of this work has come from the 9 years that Arthur mentioned that I've been analysing social media conversations. And what I'm going to present today is the simplest way that I can demonstrate how to go through this properly. And it's been worked with different live clients, different research projects. So I know that what I'm going to tell you does work. It's just a case of finding the time and having the patience to go through social media data this way. Unfortunately, there is no magic bullet. You can't click a button and get the insight that you want, actionable insight. So just to give you a bit more information on me, as Arthur said, I'm the UK's first doctor of social media. My PhD, it explored how people how people use social media data in a purchase decision and how they evaluate the credibility of that content that they find online. So it really looked at how people use and are influenced by social media when they're purchasing new products and services. Since then, I've moved more into the market research space, and I've been analysing social media conversations for market research purposes. I now work as a consultant mostly to marketers to help them to analyse and use social data to tap into their audience's non-conscious thinking and behaviours. So I typically work with some larger organisations. Arthur mentioned a few of them before, work with different research companies and also creative agencies. So before we get started, it's always quite difficult to teach people how to analyse social media data because I have no idea what level everybody is at the start. So if we could just go into our first poll, just to check to see who's currently using social media intelligence in research. So if you can answer A for yes, B for no, C for if you've tried it before, and then D for you're thinking about trying it. So we'll just wait a few seconds and see the scores on the doors. And then in the chat box as well, if you have used any social media intelligence before, can you just write down the name of any of the tools that you have had experience with? Okay, so Most people are thinking about it, 37%, that's interesting, and a few people have already used it, but we've got quite a large percentage who've not used it as well. They're at 29%. Okay, so let's move on from that poll now that I know where everyone stands. For me, when I first moved into social media intelligence, the biggest barrier that I found to actually being able to do this properly was deciding on which tool to use. And whenever I search to see what issues people are having with social media intelligence or what it is that they're trying to do, everybody always mentions tools. What's the best tool to use? The top 10 best tools for this, the top 5 best tools for that. The whole conversation is centered around about what tool are you using. Now, as a researcher, the tool is only the enabler to get to the insight. We know ourselves that we have to develop methodologies and analyze the data properly, but within a lot of this space, the tools are controlling the conversation, and the conversation, it starts off with, buy this tool and you'll get all the insight you need, which is slightly degrading insights because everybody just normally expects now to push a button and to get the insight. So there's a bit of confusion at the start about which tool to use, how to use it, and what actually the insight that you're generating from these tools. So just another quick poll just now, just to understand a bit more about what it is that you're trying to achieve with social media intelligence. You can answer multiple times here, it's not just one answer. So A for measure content performance, B for generating audience insight, C for generating brand insight, and D for measuring brand performance, and then if you can answer E if it's something else entirely. So we'll wait a few seconds and see the scores here. Okay, oh, that's interesting. So most of the people on the webinar today are looking to generate audience insight and then understand a bit more about brand insight as well. So content performance is at 12% and then brand performance is at 6%, and something else again is at 6%. Anyone who's looking for something else, it would be great if you could just put that in the chat box and just let me know what it is that you're looking for. It's always good to do a bit more research. So let's move on from that one. And at the start of the year, I did quite a lot of research into how people are trying to use social media intelligence. Now, at that time, which is why I was saying that the scores were interesting, is that 96% of the people I spoke to were looking at content performance, and then audience research, brand research, and then finally brand. So when I dug a little further, though, what I was finding is that while people were wanting to look at these, what they wanted to be able to do is make better content at the end of it after finding out all these insights. So when I went in to have a look to see what at each stage what the different tools that people were trying to use to get better content or more insight, I was astounded that what was being seen as an insight. Now this one here is a representation of a common measure for content performance, having a look to see when they should be posting content out. Now, as a metric, that's great because we see the 2 black dots here, and they're when the optimum time for posting content. But for me, it doesn't give any context into who's online, and it also doesn't give any context into what it is that we should be posting about. And that's really where social intelligence can help a lot. Understanding the audience. I don't know if anyone has used this before. This is from a company called Demographics Pro, and you can enter in a Twitter handle or an Instagram handle, and it will come back and tell you all the demographic details of who is following that particular handle. Now, again, this is great as a starter, but what we need to be able to do is then start to click into some of these different demographics and then understand the differences of those demographics, what it is that they're talking about, how their behaviour is impacted, and other demographics. But as it stands, it's just a simple representation. We need to dig more into the data. this is probably my favourite image to share with people. It's very striking, and this is used for understanding brand mentions. Now, the image is striking, and everyone goes, "Oh," when they see it. But then when we start to think about what question is it we're trying to answer, and how does this image help us answer that question? Now, what it is a set of words, of keywords that were expressed most often within a particular data set, and in the linkages between those keywords. Again, like at the start, it's completely missing the context of what that conversation is. And if we're wanting to generate from social listening through to social intelligence, we need to get smarter, and we need to dig a bit deeper into that data to understand the context. With the final one, how is my brand performing? I see a lot of these buzz charts when I'm reviewing other people's insight reports. And what I find interesting with these is that you'll have the buzz chart there, and then what happens with the analysis underneath it is that people will pick the points and the peaks, and then they will analyse within those peaks to say what drove the most engagement. Now, if you're looking for brand performance and you're working within the insights department or the marketing department, you could generally know what's caused those peaks. It may be marketing, it may be PR, there may have been a crisis. And just to go in and analyse those peaks alone is actually missing what's happening, what the conversations are happening day in, day out about that brand, and understanding the performance and what makes that brand special, or how they're feeling in the eyes of their customers. So we can't just go in on a daily, pick a peak and analyse a day. We need to analyse the data all the way through that particular time period. So I posed this question for our third poll in a blog when I was going in and analysing what the social tools give you and what insight is available. And I believe that social analysis tools are killing the insights industry. So when I was speaking to the ICG about this, we decided to run it as a poll to see what you guys think, or if I'm just on a one-woman crusade. So if you think they are, after what we've gone through this morning, answer A for yes, B for no, C for maybe, or D for I don't know. Okay, just wait a few more seconds and then we'll get the answers to that poll. Okay, so there's quite a lot of no's there, 49%. So it looks like there's a 3% there that's saying yes, and 24% maybe, and 24% don't know. I think it's very interesting, and what we need to think about is how we're using the tools. The tools are the enabler, and to get to the insight that we need, we then need to be able to segment the data and interpret the data. And for me, that's what's missing from the social analysis tools just now, and missing from all the insights reports that I read and I'm asked to critique on. It's how do we take this from being data and being able to turn it into an actionable insight. And we're going to have a look at that today, and I've got some different strategies for you. So let's move on from that poll just now, and let's get started properly. So just to kind of recap what we've gone through, the first thing here. I say stop using the automated features in these social tools. The social tools are great, but they're just an enabler to get you to the data. Continue to use the social tools to enable the analysis process. But what we need to do is we need to start developing segmentation strategies to enable us to get to the data that we need, and then being able to interpret that data. So taking all that into consideration, I spent the last 8 months having a look to see and mapping out the social media intelligence landscape, understanding about what people are trying to achieve, where the social tools fit into that, and where the gaps in the market are. And as I said before, the gap seems to be the tools are there. There's so many tools. The slide that I showed before was only 1% of the tools that are available on the market. So the tools are there, but we need to know in what circumstances are we using them? How are we going to use them? And then the end bit is how do we interpret that data? We can't just run these automated reports all the time, because it doesn't actually tell us anything apart from measure counts or There's some fluffy metrics like the buzz and then topic word clouds in there as well. So what I've done is I've gone back into my own PhD. I've been reading in other areas as well, and I've developed people science for your social data. Now this is an interdisciplinary approach to help you analyse and interpret social data. So we're taking from things like data science, cognitive psychology, there's neuroscience, brand science, marketing science, personality psychology in there as well. And what we're doing is we're finding the theories and we're finding the frameworks that enable us to analyse the data and to be able to interpret that data to really get a depth of insight that stops people from saying, so what? Or it's nice to know, it's not need to know, when they begin to see these social insights reports. So the three common questions that I have to answer out when clients come to me. The first one is, who is my audience? This seems to be a growing area, and more people are wanting to understand who their audience is. Because when there's 100,000 people there, they're not an audience of 100,000 that are exactly the same. There's differences within those segments. Why did my audience behave this way? Typically, there can be quite a lot of crisis situations, or an audience can react badly to a particular piece of content, and brands are wanting now to understand a bit more about what makes their audience tick. Why did they behave that way? So they can either stop the behaviour or amplify that behaviour. And then the final one is what is my brand reputation? So building things like brand trackers to understand about what's happening day in, day out with the brand and what impact that has upon brand reputation. So let's go into the first one just now. Who is my audience? Now, there's a few different tools that deal specifically with audiences and developing out audience segments. Now, this one here is from a tool called Afino, and this is the typical output that you can get. Now, you can see down here that they've got the Miami Dolphins audience, and then from that audience, they've got different. This is the whole audience here. And then what they've done is they've segmented that audience based upon audience interest, secondary interest. So we've got WWE fans, we've got football fans, there's hardcore fans, rap fans, sports dads are in there as well, and general sports fans, just to have a few of them there, which is great because then we get to understand a bit more about this audience's secondary interests. But just looking at that, that's where that insight stops. So for me, what we need to understand is what makes the Miami Dolphins WWE fans different. How do they behave differently to the general Dolphins fans? How do they behave differently to the sports stats? So we can begin to target each of these customer groups a little differently and serve them the content that they want to see. So this is from another one called People Pattern. They deal with audience persona development slightly differently. But again, I would ask you, do you think that there's enough insight there to make informed decisions? We've got all the different influencers there down at the left-hand side. We've got their audience attributes. You can see their genders. This is for people who are interested in social media. You can see a bit more about their interests. They're interested in cooking, music, and religion. And then you can see the ages there. So the peak age here for people interested in social media is 30. But what else? What does it tell us about that audience apart from a few nice to knows? So I think for me, when I was looking at this and the best way to approach this type of analysis, I went back into customer persona models. So here's an example of a customer persona model. So what we're looking at is, what does this particular, it's a woman in this one, so what is she thinking and feeling? What really matters to her? What occupies her thinking? What does she want to hear? What are her friends, family, and other influencers saying to her that impacts her thinking? What does she say and what does she do? What's her attitude towards others? What does she do in public? What does she see? What things are in her environment? What competitors are she seeing? And then we've got her pains. What's her worries and her fears? And what's her gains? What is she hoping to get? What does success look like for her? Now, changing up the focus of analysis between the interests, like we had before, and some simple demographics, into really targeting and understanding that audience. So what generally happens here is that brands want to know about themselves. They want to understand their audience. And they have a bit of a blindness in terms of, I only want to know about it when it's related to my brand. But you can see from this and in customer persona development that we're actually really centering the focus of analysis on those customer groups. What's their pains? What's their fears? What is it that they're doing, thinking and feeling and seeing? And then by understanding all of that, we can be better equipped with the brand to help them develop out different pieces of content. We can find new opportunities and new markets to enter because we're not so focused completely on the brand and the brand mentions. We're changing the focus of analysis up to understanding the audience and what their needs are. So for this, we need to stop simplifying personas to the interests only because we're not getting enough information. Yet we begin to know some secondary interests, and in other things we begin to know where they hang out online, but it doesn't really tell us about who that audience is and what we need to do to serve them better. We need to continue using the social tools, but we need to think about a combination of the tools to use. So for me, when I'm understanding personas, I generally use between 2 and 3 different social tools. I start off with something like the Demographics Pro or the Afino or the People Pattern and understand a bit more about their interests, about where they hang out online, and begin then to develop out a basis for some persona development. What I would do is within some of those different, even if it's a demographic or if it's a psychographic like the interests, is then go and begin to map those people out from and how they interact with the brand, what it is that they're looking for. For example, there was one project that I did recently, and I was looking at the customer journey for a brand. We'll cover this in the final section as well. And I found that their audience online wasn't their actual target customer. That audience was a much younger demographic than their audience. And this audience made a lot of noise online, but they didn't purchase. So we've got someone's audience, which is a very large audience, and their audience is not their customer. And then this audience was then controlling the brand's message that was coming through. So we need to be able to understand a bit more about them and what was motivating them to engage, but not actually motivating consumers to engage. And then what we also need to do is start finding out the differences in behaviour and the needs of each persona group to increase organisational empathy. So let's have a look at explaining behaviour. Now, when people ask me to explain behaviour, it can come in different ways. People want to understand their content performance, as was mentioned at the start, and they also want to measure a lot of the time the earned mentions as well. So that's people discussing the brand openly online. What's driving that behaviour? Now, the easiest way I can show you this, how it works in a webinar, is just to take some of the owned content and begin to explain what's happening here. Now, this was from Tea in the Park. And you can see here that this was actually an Instagram post. And you can see here that they're wanting their audience to relive their experience. They're wanting to know their highlights of Tea in the Park. And you can see in the comments, and this is only a few of the comments that was on that post, about having waiting time, and then they're not allowing some pictures to go through on this as well. So there's quite a lot of negativity towards that one post. But when we look at this post, which was from the same time, it was posted round about the same time, and Tea in the Park have done a little roundup of Tea in the Park, saying that they love them, and then we've got some of the different bands, and that was a video that's being played there. And then we've got the sentiment towards the brand completely changing. It said, I had a fantastic time. I was there with 2 friends. And to give you a bit of background into this, Tea in the Park had moved to festival site in 2015, and there had been some issues with delays in being able to leave the campsite, which had and the arena, which had resulted in quite a lot of people coming online to say that they were stuck, or parents looking for children because they were stuck. When the communication from the brand came out after the festival, people within the reliving one were asked to relive their experience, which you can see they were doing. And because of the end result in having the delays and having to wait about, that negative experience was amplified because we tend to remember the very first and the very last thing that happens to us, and go on with that emotion. So why was these two things were posted at the same time, but they received different engagement and different sentiment? So if we go back and we think about consumer behaviour theory and psychology, we begin to see that the drivers for festival purchases are shared experiences and hedonism. In the first one, they're actively asking people to relive their experience. That experience, because of the end of it, was quite negative for a lot of people, and they were coming back and they were going through the call to action and they were reliving that experience. In the second one, the one that received more engagement and got more positive engagement, they were sending out a communication about the reason for experiencing. So they were bringing it back to talk about the music rather than the experience. So the differences within the types of engagement, although they were at the same time, it was because one was asking about the experience and then one was amplifying the good parts of the experience, which is why everyone was there, which was the music and the enjoyment of the music. So when we start to analyse social media data to find out why people behave the way they do, we always need to go back to theory. We need to be able to interpret that and say, why is this happening? It's not a case of pushing a button. The data will segment itself and you'll see some numbers. You may have some qualitative analysis there to understand a bit more of the context. But what we need to do is not just see what's happened, but we need to see why it has happened to be able to help for planning in the future. So what we need to do for audience behaviour is stop using metrics to try and explain behaviour. Some simple metrics won't do that. They will give you what's happened, but they're not going to give you why it's happened. We then need to focus on the content of engagement in both the owned and earned content. So then the one that I've just shown you there, that was owned content. And there was a bit of earned in there because people were then commenting on it. But if we were to put in a wider search that had everything to do with tea in the park and the festival there, we would be able to get every single mention of tea in the park on public social media posts. And then we need to start using theory to interpret the findings and explain behaviour. Without that, it's a nice to know, not a need to know. In the third one, we're looking at measuring brand reputation. Now, I said at the start, when I see people measuring brand reputation, I get a buzz graph. And people talk about the peaks and what's happening and what's driving the conversation. It's only telling you part of the story, as I explained before. It's not telling you what's happening day in, day out with that brand. What's the points where we can amplify a message, and where's the points where we really need to fix a pain for a customer. So I'm going to take you into an example that I've recently done with an FMCG brand to understand a bit more about how their audience were engaging with them, who the audience were, and what was the impact on reputation towards the brand. Now, for this, the company I was working with was already quite sophisticated in the fact that they had defined audience personas, which we were to test to make sure that they were accurate, and they also understood a bit more about their customer journey. So the way that they broke down their customer journey is they broke it down into, now this is all, if you look in the screen here, you can see advocacy, awareness, buy, consider, enjoy, retweet, and uncategorized. Now this comes from Brandwatch, and this was a tool that I used to do this particular piece of analysis. So it's in alphabetical order. In fact, the customer journey is not like that, but it's been mapped out in alphabetical order here. What I did within here is for all the different mentions, there's 157 of them there in one small cluster, which I brought up to show you. And what I was doing is I was having to then go, okay, so what's the context of this communication? What part of the customer journey does that relate to? And then put it into one of my high-level categories, which was the advocacy, awareness, buy, consider, enjoy, retweet, or uncategorized. Now, I've kept the uncategorized in there, and if the tweets or other content didn't fit into any of my other segments, what would happen is I would put it into the uncategorized. I call these outliers, and then when I've analysed everything that fits nicely into the structure, I then go back into the uncategorized and have a look at the outliers. Is what tends to happen is brands have one perception of who they are, what the journey is, but in reality that's not always reflected by the audience. So we need to understand the audience perception of this, and then we can bring even more insight into the brand, because it's a complete unknown to them at that time, because it's not been noted down in their processes anywhere before. So we can begin to show them actually what's happening with their customer group. So if we just go on to the next one now, we've got the same one here. So the advocacy, awareness, buy, consider, enjoy, retweet, and uncategorize, they're my high level segmentation. And then underneath that, we've got different levels again. So in advocacy, we've got customer experience, quality, advocate for brand controller, status, and aesthetic. So these are reasons why people were advocating for the brand. Now, these have been generated just by understanding and analysing the data. We didn't have classifications for those at the start. So they've all come out of the conversations, because it's really difficult to know until you've analysed the data what these mid-level ones are, what the mid-level classifications are going to be. So if we go on to the next part, we can see that the awareness here is game type change. There's different sponsorships that are coming through there, competitions, YouTube videos. They were looking for to receive one of the products for review, or an advert. In the buy, so there's lots of different ones for the buy here. So this is reasons for why people wanted to buy. So we've got purchase intent is in there. We've got people looking for upgrades, people looking for new controllers, the purchase method, the shipping. So this is everything to do with how it is that people are buying, in that process of buying and why they want to buy. So within here, what we've got is we have all of these different segments, and then underneath each one of them, I then go into each one of these mid segments and analyze the context of conversation from in there, which then may result in other segments being produced. So when we're talking about shipping, we may be talking about problems to do with shipping, we may be talking about the cost of shipping, we may be talking about who the shipper is, and then begin to understand and analyse the context of the conversation into each of these even smaller sub-segments to be able to bring back the analysis and the insight that the company is looking for. And is there a specific, if we go back to the customer personas from the start, is there a specific group of people that are interacting with the brand that are having issues? Maybe it's functionality issues, maybe it's shipping issues or purchase issues. So who are these people? So we're not taking everyone as a whole, we're actually going back into the customer persona and understanding about what's happening to each of these personas at every stage of the customer journey. Now, everyone loves a graph. So once we've done all of this research and put all of these mentions into their different, I call them buckets, we can begin then to do a buzz graph, but it's a buzz graph that tells us a little bit more. So within here, you can see the different, so we've got the different high level topics there, and then you can see how they are discussed on a daily basis. So the one that's highest here is the retweet, because there's quite a lot of retweets on the comment. But you can see where the other ones track. So probably the one with the highest there is the awareness section. So there's more people talking about the brand in the awareness stage of the journey. And then because we've gone in and we've done all the sub-segmentation, we can then develop another graph that shows them exactly what that conversation looks like. So for this one here, pricing is spoken about 16% of the time. The 33% is purchase intent. So 33% of the time when anybody mentions anything to do with the purchase of one of these products for this brand, they're actually mentioning a level of intent to purchase. Now within that we've got I want to purchase, I've just purchased, we've got people who are thinking about purchasing, and then we can find out what the drivers for that purchase are. So for this particular brand, what we found out was that the aesthetic of that brand, how that brand looked and how that brand felt in comparison to competitors, was one of the key driving features for people wanting to purchase. So if we're looking to engage with people on a deeper level, we know why it is they want to purchase this brand, and we can start to amplify the message about the aesthetic of the controller, because that's what people are really into them for. So with the brand reputation, stop using automated buzz charts and then the topic clouds as well. We need to continue using social listening tools, but focused on the advanced segmentation part of it. So what we've just gone through there just now with that brand is more to do with advanced segmentation. When we go to then analyse each of the different segments, if we think about what we did for Tea in the Park there and being able to interpret why were people behaving a certain way, we do exactly the same here within each of those segments. So when you're doing the social media analysis, when you're doing social intelligence, you don't know what's going to come out of the analysis beforehand. You need to constantly keep on referring back to find out why this is happening, find the trigger for it, understand why do we want to amplify that message and how do we do that, or do we want to start to nudge the behaviour a different way? What is the behaviour and what's the best way to nudge that behaviour? So what we need to do with this is start deciding on the segmentation agenda and go for depth. So within that example that I gave you there, what we were looking at was 3 different levels of analysis. We had the high level with the customer journey, we had the mid level, which was the stages within each of the stages in each of those journey parts, and then we had the level below that, which was the different reasons why people were talking about shipping or buying. We can go even deeper than that. It just depends on the question that you're answering and what's happening within the data. Because it's communication and conversation that's generated by the audience, by the public, you can never guarantee how much conversation is going to be there and to what depth you can go. So just to kind of round up on what we've covered here, this is my preparation checklist, and this is what I go through before I start any project. Want to understand what the question is that we're trying to answer. There is 3 different broad questions here. Sometimes the questions can be a lot more specific, and we need to understand exactly what it is that the client is looking for. We need to select the data sources that we're going to use. So when you put in these searches, most of the time, 99% of the time, Twitter will come back as having the highest number of mentions, just because of the open nature of that platform, the amount of publicly available data there. But other times when you're working with other brands, I have some brands that we only deal with online forums, and we just analyse the online forums. So we need to understand about what is the data. Is the data earned data? Is the data going to be from their owned content? You need to understand and select what that's going to be. Then we come from the segmentation agenda. So from here, we've got the question and the data sources. So how are we going to segment that data? We've not spoken about social tools yet. We want to understand a bit more about the method that we need to go through to get to the insight that we want. And then after we've got that segmentation agenda, we then determine which social tools are required. So for the one in the brand that I mentioned before, I had to use a few different tools. One, Brand Watch was used to gather all the data in terms of how people are talking about that brand. Then after I got all of those mentions and segmented them into their different segments, I then had to use another tool to understand a bit more about the people behind those conversations. So what was really important to that is determining the tool compatibility. So essentially for that project, I had to gather all the data in one. I then had to segment that data in the same tool, but then after that segmentation, I had to export it from one application and then import it to another application. After that one had done the analysis, I then had to bring that back into BrandWatch. Then BrandWatch was great with the other tool because I knew that I was going to have the ease to do that. So when you're doing social intelligence projects, like I said, it's not just about the tool that you have, it's about the tools that you need to use. These tools are just an enabler, and you need to understand how they work together. Then there's a development of the search query. So after we've decided on how it is we're going to segment the data, we need to develop the query that we're going to use to gather all that. And is done mostly with keyword searches. So we need to understand what that is. A trick here is don't always think of the most logical way to say something. You need to go into the data a little bit, go into some of the different social networking sites and test out how people are talking. For instance, I live in Scotland, as you can probably tell. Over the years, I've developed a Scottish lexicon because we see things like ken, which mean no, and there's all sorts of other different words. So I need to be able to segment those words and understand what they mean. So when you're developing the search query, think about what's going to be important to your audience and how it is that they talk. Then after the search query is in, you need to cleanse the data and segment the data in terms of your high, medium, and low segmentation. After that, determine the outliers. So how many have come back and is uncategorized? And then how can we then go back in and analyze that data to make a bit more sense of it? Is there another category there that the brand doesn't know and we've not been able to spot? And then we can begin to bring that new insight into the brands to really refine what it is that they're doing. What do these outliers tell you? We also need to do is run analysis in each section and understand the context. So when we're going in to see the very lowest subsection is like, why are people talking? What is it that they're talking about? And then interpret the data and findings in relation to the theory. So that's what I've got for you today. It's quite high level. I understand that. It's quite difficult to teach someone exactly how to do the analysis through a webinar because the screen size and being able to go in and out of the different social tools as well. What I've done to combat some of this and to really encourage more learning within this area is develop a workshop. This workshop's called Measure to Engage. And what you'll be able to do from the end of the workshop is learn how to commission, run, and understand social data analysis. This follows my people metrics and my people science for your social data approach. And you really get in and you get to use some of the different tools and approaches and be able to take those and just apply those into your own workplace. There is a 25% discount for ICG members. It's on London on the 27th of September. If you go to Eventbrite and search for Measure to Engage, you'll be able to have a more robust look at what's in the course there. So that's us for this morning. I'm hoping that there's some good questions coming up. If you've got any questions, if you want to just type them in, and I'll hand back across to Arthur just now.
Okay, thanks, Jillian. Actually, very, very rich, very detailed, and I'm sure there's going to be lots of questions that focus on that. The first question that we've got in has actually come from Nanda Marchant, and I think it's a question that certainly, when I was listening to you, came to mind straight away. What we often do is we try and use these analysis tools to save us time, because we know that there are two extremes. On the one hand, you can do everything manually, you can read everything, but there's far too much data these days to do that. And at the other end, you can use the machine and sort of believe what it tells you. So this question really is, she asks, are you undertaking most of this coding and segmenting manually or using tools and word searches, etc., to help? I think what we need to know is what's the balance between automated and manual input and work that you have to do?
For me, now that I've done this quite a lot, 9 years, I've developed a mechanism. Now, I have to start from scratch for every single client because I need to understand a bit more about how their audience speak about them. After you've got that, so there can be quite a lot of manual to begin with, just to understand a bit more about words and whereabouts they would fit into within this customer journey. After you've got that, you can then start to use more of the automation, and then just do a scan to check to make sure they're within the right segment. So it's a balance of both. There was once I had to analyse social media conversations from political party leaders, and I had to do all that by hand. So that was 17,000. I had to categorise by hand. So it took quite a while. But the depth of analysis was a lot greater because I was able to do everything again by hand.
But in terms of how we might look at doing this, I mean, if we're thinking of our own inputs and our own involvement, and I'm not saying we're starting from scratch, but let's say we're certainly not as experienced as you, but we're looking to do more than what we all ordinarily do. It's not easy to sort of try and cost. I mean, you can cost the use of a tool, but it's difficult to sort of say, well, how much of my time is it going to take? Do you have any advice on that?
It can take, yeah, I think there's a skill in that which I've also had to learn the hard way. And what you'll find is that the preparation for the data analysis takes a lot longer than the actual analysis itself, because you've got to cleanse and segment all that data. I generally keep between 2 and 3 days for cleansing and segmentation of the data, and then a few days after that for analysis and interpretation and writing up. So depending upon the depth of it, it's difficult until you get the project. So if it's a really big project, give yourself a lot of time to do it. And if it's a smaller project, then I have some that you can turn around in a couple of days. It's quite intensive, but you are able to do it after you've got that skill built.
Okay, we've got another question that's come in from Tom Woodnut. Great presentation, thanks, he starts. Tools can allow you to segment based on what they've said and your categorization of it. But can they accurately segment who said what in terms of age, gender, etc.? I mean, what are the limitations here in your view?
So it's a really good question, Tom, and it's something that's come up a couple of times for me within the past fortnight. So within this, because you know yourself that it's very difficult to get age data from social media conversations, and when you consider the fact that it's mostly tweets that you're probably dealing with particularly for big brands, you're going, how on earth do they do that? I've got different suppliers that I do this with, and they tell me that there's a 95% accuracy within that, and it's based upon them stitching together their social profiles from like LinkedIn or from Facebook, and then understanding about how they talk and about the subjects that they talk about, and they say that their algorithm is 95% accurate. Doing more testing within that to see from people who it is that I know their age, and then going to run some analysis through to see how that actually comes out, to check to see if it is accurate. But a lot of the time these tools, their algorithms are black box, so it's really difficult to tell for 100% that it is doing what it says it's doing.
Yeah. Anamita Sharma, hi Anamita, she's come in with I think a very relevant question. The tools that you're going to use to this, are you able to access them on a project by project basis? Do you have to have an annual license? How does it work?
Yeah, hi, that's also a great question. That depends on the tool. You've got the social listing tools, which are the big ones like Brandwatch and Crimson Hexagon, Individual Atlas, people like that. They tend to want you to buy a year's license. Now, I know as a researcher that unless you're in a massive agency, that's probably not going to happen for the independents, because you're maybe on a project for between 4 and 8 weeks, and then you've got this tool, and they can be quite expensive. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to work with them that would enable me to then give you access to my license, and then you could use my data allowance just to bring more people and give them access to the tools and to the data. So we're still working through that process just now.
Right. So in other words, it's for an independent, it's potentially challenging, yeah.
Yeah. Because of the cost. I mean, most of the tools, the social listening tools, we're probably talking between £2,000 and £3,000 a month for access to the license.
Wow. So obviously it has to be an investment that the client makes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So we have a question here from Karen Cooper. Hi, Karen. Thanks for a thought-provoking presentation. How do you deal with Facebook not allowing scraping aside from public or fan pages?
So Facebook is a funny one now, Karen, and you can get some information, as you said, from public. The other way is they've opened up. They now do macro analysis. So if you were looking to find out what people are discussing about BMWs, you could do that and segment it down a bit on some of the demographics and get the topics that they're discussing, but in no way is it as in depth as what it would be for say Twitter or for Instagram. But I think they might change soon because of they're owned by Facebook. So it depends. One's for a more macro view, and then something else is more for a micro view into the individual level.
Well, I suppose the follow-on question from that is how much is missing? The fact that you can't access an awful lot of the Facebook content, how does that, to what extent is that influencing your ability to do social media analysis?
So it's difficult it's quite difficult to explain. So we've got, what I tend to do is I get the Facebook topic data and I understand a bit more about that and what's driving there. But in terms of being able to identify individual, it's predominantly done on Twitter and on forums and things. And what we're doing is trying to understand, is it the same kind of age demographics, the same kind of people that are talking within these individual ones? Does their makeup look like that Facebook audience? And then just drilling down into that is quite a back and forward process, unfortunately.
I mean, what's the situation with WhatsApp chats? I mean, are they accessible?
No, we can't get anything to do with that. So there is limitations in terms of the data that you've got there. But when you start to look at things like there's a certain scope where if there's only about 1,000 mentions, it's maybe not worth doing the analysis, because you're not going to get that significance compared to if there's 100,000 or 1 million mentions. So begin to bring it back like that.
So what's the future then? Because if your ability to analyse social media data is going to be restricted by the platform owners, is that going to get worse? Are they going to be more restrictive?
Yeah, so we've obviously got the EU legislation coming in there as well, but I hear that it's not as significant for research when you're anonymising the data. So that's kind of not as much of a worry. I think with the platforms themselves, you know yourself, you've mentioned WhatsApp, that there's an inability to access some of that data. I think what will eventually happen is it'll swing round and it'll be up to the individual person whether or not people get access to these data pods.
Okay.
It's always a worry, Arthur. You've got to make sure.
No, I can see that, because you don't have access to perhaps what is potentially a major part of the story.
Yeah. Well, particularly for the behind the scenes chats, people will. I would imagine that they speak slightly differently on WhatsApp to what they do in other places and go into a bit more detail.
Okay, I've got a question in from Liz Montgomery. Hi, Liz. She says 27th of September for your workshop, which is next week, of course, is a bit soon. When's the next one that you're planning on doing?
The next one will be into February now. So it'll be February 2017.
Okay, so if you could let us know, because the policy we have with the ICG e-group is if you offer ICG members a discount, then we're happy to make a posting to make people aware of it. So I think
it did go through, but you've maybe not picked it up before now. It wasn't until the date was set for this that it was the 22nd. I realised it was quite tight.
Yeah. Okay. And if you just drop a note through to Lucy, that's fine. Okay. Well, we've hang on. Simon Riley. I thought we were at the end of our questions. We've just been one-handed by Simon. Thanks, Jillian. Do you have a feel for which demographics are more likely to rule themselves out of data sets through privacy settings?
I've not done any research on it, like as in empirical research, so I can't be 100% certain. When you're having a look to see what the conversation is like, you tend to find that it's the older demographic that's slightly more wary of privacy settings. So there's certain instances where you can see that there's maybe a lot of people following an account, but it's the younger ones who are engaging with it. So it tends to be a little bit younger that you get the most data from.
Yeah. I suppose that makes sense. Okay. Well, thanks. That was a really, really great webinar. You've covered ground which I'm sure some of us have not seen before, and the way you put it together, and also I thought it was really interesting. You didn't trash certain things that had been done over the last few years, but you certainly gave some very big warning signs to us as to how we should approach them. So thanks very much indeed for an excellent presentation, and many thanks to Hoban Focus for sponsoring the event.